Greetings and welcome to the broadcast. I'm your host. Today we're going to go off track a little bit and we're going to read the second most published book on the face of the earth. Now, without a doubt, the Bible is the first most published book on the face of the earth. That goes against Chairman Mayo and all the multiple millions of copies of the Red Book he made and all that. In fact, many people estimate that if you were to stack all the Bibles ever published up, let's just say that stack was as high as your door, about 7 feet tall, the door. The second most published book on earth would be less than half of that stack, be less than half. And the other books, like the third, fourth, or fifth most published book on the face of the earth since recorded history, would be way down there. Well, the second most published book is one that some people have heard something about called the Pilgrims Progress. Pilgrims Progress, written by John Bunyan. Now, what this makes kind of a very unusual thing is Bunyan is one of these guys that could have gotten burnt at the stake almost. He was a very strong believer in reading his Bible, studying it, preaching. He had a little, like we would call today, a house church. Great family, good wife and kids. Unfortunately, one of his young daughters was born blind. That was very, very, very sad. So he was basically sent into a very nasty prison and told he had to recant his faith and things like that, kind of like Guantanamo Bay in Cuba right now. And so he says, no, I'm not going to do it. Well, he had a large family. I think he had 8 children or so. So he wrote to encourage his kids in the faith, kind of like a fairy tale, if you will. It would be like, say in the 60s or 70s, they used to have cartoons like Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny kids would look at and get some kind of a message. And even now, people collect old comic books, and they even like to see old snippets of video from 50 years old. Well, I'm going to go ahead and read just a portion. I've got one of the original copies of Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. This will give us just not only a window into what it was like hundreds of years ago, but also what the second most published book on earth might sound like and how they wrote back then. So let's get ready for a ride. We'll go ahead and start now with Chapter 1 called The City of Destruction. I sat alone on the hill above the city. It had been a long day. My friends had gone home some time ago, leaving me to think about the heavy weight on my back. I knew I'd feel better as soon as I could find a way to get rid of it. I looked at the gloomy streets spread out below. Even with the sun shining, everything seemed broken and neglected. The city would only look worse when the winter winds and rain came. The city of destruction. No wonder I felt unhappy in a place with a name like that. There were days when I'd do anything to get away. The only good times for me were when the visitors came with their message of hope. "Leave this city now, Christian," they said. "Go while you're young and strong and travel to the celestial city where the king lives. You'll be safe there." Whenever I asked my friends if they would go with me, they told me the celestial city was only make-believe. Just a place. Nowhere could be better or safer than our city, they said. Now on the hill, I felt sure the visitors were speaking the truth, but a few months earlier, I'd been given a special book, and in it I read exactly the same thing the visitors were telling me about the king and the way to him, and how the city of destruction would be destroyed one day. I showed the book to 2 of my friends, but all they did was laugh. "That book was written a long time ago. It's not of any use anymore. Not now," one of them said. "The king's army hasn't come, and we don't think it ever will. Take it easy, Christian. Let's enjoy ourselves while we can." So I sat there looking down at the grimy city, wondering if I'd been able to find my way to the king on my own. The more I thought about it, the more I was afraid I'd get lost if I tried it. Even so, I had to get away. Opening my book again, I read about the king's own son, who had once come here to this city of destruction and invited everyone to go to live with him. I noticed how dirty my clothes had become. I was now in my teens, so I'd worn them a long time, and they were frayed and shabby. The more I tried to live a good life, the worse they looked. Even if I do find the celestial city, I decided, I can't expect the king to receive me dressed in nothing but rags. My mother was already living with the king in his city, and of course she had wanted my father and me to join her there. When I got home, the woman who came in every day to look after me asked if I was ill. "Christian, you look so miserable this morning. She said, "Are you running a fever?" I told her I wanted to go to the celestial city, and she just laughed at me, just as my friends had done. "Just get that nonsense out of your head," she snapped irritably. "There is no celestial city, my lad. If you go wandering along the road after those visitors, you'll soon get lost." So I went to bed without saying anything more, but it was a long time before I could get to sleep. Chapter number 2, Evangelist. When I went out the next morning, the sun was shining brightly again. Some of my friends asked me to join them, but I told them, "I can't. I've made up my mind to go to the celestial city. Will you come with me and help me find the way?" "You're crazy," they said. "You just keep going on about that stupid celestial city. Why don't you just go there instead of talking about it and spoiling all of our fun?" I didn't like arguing, so I let them waffle off to walk away and do whatever they were planning. Presently, my friend Christiana came down the street. She stopped to speak to me, which made me feel a little better. Christiana was the sort of friend who understands when things aren't going well. "Why do you listen to the visitors if they make you so unhappy?" she asked, which is something I'd been wondering myself. Then, without waiting for an answer, she said, "Come on, let's climb the hill." Although Christiana said she didn't believe the stories in my book, she never laughed at me. I think in a way she wanted to believe they were true. Perhaps she even thought they were. "You know," I said as we walked up the path, "I have to go to the king. I've not told you before, but I have a burden to carry. The king is the only one who can take it from me." "Burden?" Christiana asked, sounding surprised. "I can't see a burden." "It's on my back and it feels so heavy, it makes me tired." Christiana came around behind me, looked puzzled. "You must be ill, Christian, if you think there's something on your back." "I'm not ill," I insisted. "Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there." We reached the top of the hill and were so out of breath that I forgot about my plans for my journey, and it wasn't until I got back that night that I began to think again of the celestial city. The house was empty, the woman who looked after me was gone as usual, and my father was not back from work as usual. He had an important job in the city and always came home late. The next morning I went round to Christiana's house, hoping to go out with her again and persuade her to travel with me. Her parents had both gone to live with the king, and she told me she had too much to do at home, as she was now like a mother to her 4 young brothers. My other friends said they wanted nothing to do with me, so I wandered down to the meadow, outside the city wall, and I sat down on the grass bank and I read my book. The more I read, the more I was convinced that I really needed to find the king. As I read about the king's son, tears came into my eyes. I thought he might not want anything to do with me, even if I found him. After a while, I heard someone coming. I looked up and saw one of the visitors on his way to the city. His name was Evangelist. I'd seen him before, and I think he recognized me because he came over. I looked the other way. My eyes were red from crying, and I felt foolish. "Why are you upset?" Evangelist asked. I found his voice very comforting, so I told him how I wanted to get away and how my friends had made fun of me, and how no one seemed to believe there really was a place called the Celestial City. "And what is the book in your hand?" Evangelist asked. I showed it to him. "This book is why I'm upset," I said. "It tells me there's no hope for me if I stay here in the city of destruction. Is this book true?" "The book is true," Evangelist said. "But haven't you read the good news in there as well?" I put the book down. What good news?" I asked. "Your book says the king loves everyone. He even loves you, Christian. If you start your journey, he'll watch over you all the way. Then, when you reach the celestial city, you'll be safe forever." I never read that. But I don't know what to do, how I would start if I could even find the way. Evangelist turned and looked across the fields along the path by which he'd come. "Do you see a high wall in that far distance?" He pointed with his finger. but my eyes were still cloudy with tears, and I wasn't able to see anything clearly. "Look, look," the evangelist said. "There's a light shining above it. Can you see that?" I thought I could, so I nodded. That light marks the start, and that was the start of my way to the celestial city. "Is that the only way?" I asked. "Indeed, yes, there is no other way. The king's son made that wicket gate. Now I'll show you a promise to all travelers." Well, folks, that's just a little sample right there of the first little bit of Pilgrims Progress. Now, it was written originally in the old Elizabethan English, like these, thou, wheretofore, hence, wherefore, hence thou comest over, that kind of talk. Now, I actually had one of those original ones, and it was a doozy to read. I mean, it was like Shakespeare. After a while, you can read it. How good is it for your listeners? Well, to an older listener, there would be some culture to it, and the sentence structure and the cadence of the way they use their words back then. But nowadays, people look at you blankly, or they think you're just like a parrot in a cage if you were to read that old Elizabethan English. Not all, but some. However, when someone translates it into the kind of English that we speak here and now, this is what you get, the sample that I just read for you here of Pilgrim's Progress. Again, the guy's name was John Bunyan. The stuff is almost always free. If you can go to LibriVox, they have it free. They'll read it to you. If you want to have a Kindle, if you have a Kindle reader, it's free there as well. They also have a paid version that's been slicked up a little bit. And I believe the Gutenberg Press has online versions of it for free. Now, we are what I'm going to have to do, off topic here again, sometimes people will ask, I'm not so sure about this Bible stuff, the people, the way they believe, and that's understandable. Those kind of conversations take place, I think, with a lot of us. And the question that used to come up every 5 or so years is, if you were stranded on a desert island and you knew that was it for the end of your life, and you had your needs taken care of, there was plenty of coconuts, plenty of fruit, plenty of fresh water, you were not going to freeze to death, you weren't going to get hot or cold, but for mentally, what's the 5 books that you would take with you to stimulate your mind? Now, they used to ask stuff like this years ago. In fact, sometimes during a job, now we're talking back in the 50s and 60s, during a job interview, you would sometimes be asked, hey, name 5 or 6 books you'd take with you if you were stranded on an island. The hope was, of course, you could get a window into the prospective candidates, his thinking, his thoughts, and his belief system as well. Well, one of the books is Eusebius, the church historian. Now, this is a book that you may have heard of, Fox's Book of Martyrs, and that's a good one as well. But the church historian takes a chronological step from about the time Jesus was done being crucified and goes on from there, just talking about historical events, not preaching, just historical events. And that's a good one. Another one, of course, would be Eusebius, the church historian would be one, The next would be Ussher's Annals of the World. Now, that's a thick book. That's about 3 times as thick as the Bible. About every 10 years, you can order them from certain book distributors. There's nothing wrong. You can order them. They're not. I think they are restricted in a couple countries, but a couple companies still have them available to order. And this is something that would take like bits and snippets of, let's just say, for instance, throughout history, Antony and Cleopatra. Well, they were born about the same time Jesus Christ was born. All 3 of those were historical figures who really lived and walked the earth and died. And so you would be able to read letters about Antony and Cleopatra and what they said about Jesus Christ in that same time frame, and really get a window into the essence, if you will, of that time. It goes throughout the whole earth. Many people use that to try to clock the exact age of the earth. So that's a lot of fun. There's other books, but again, as we go into 2017, 2018, people don't really like books that much. Sometimes they've been done a disservice at their state school, and they haven't been taught to read properly or to remember things. Folks, we're going to go ahead and close now. This is a little snippet of the first part of Pilgrim's Progress. Hope this gave you something to think about. There's some good books out there. Don't forget, Jesus Christ, the one they crucified, he really is Lord, and he's here to save you. Take care, and bye for now.